My daughter-in-law tried to sabotage my citizenship test, mocking my accent and feeding me lies to prove I was senile. She wanted my house. She didn't count on me being a better strategist. I used her own lies as a trap that didn't just expose her cruelty, it had a federal officer listening to every word. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Lena Adeyemi, and at 71, I have learned that promises, especially those made to the dead, have a weight that anchors the soul. My late husband, Adekunle, and I arrived in this country from our home in Lagos over 40 years ago with 2 sturdy suitcases, 500 borrowed dollars, and a shared dream of building a new life. He was an engineer, brilliant and hardworking, and I was a teacher. We worked tirelessly, navigating the strange new world with a mixture of hope and trepidation, our love for each other a constant, steady flame. Adekunle embraced America with his whole heart. He loved its vastness, its chaotic energy, its promise of a future for our son, Keith. His one regret before a sudden illness took him from me 5 years ago was that we had never formalized our place here. "Lena, my love," he'd said, his hand in mine, his voice a frail echo of its former strength, "become a citizen for me. For us. Plant your roots deep in this soil we have tended together." And so his final wish became my final, sacred dream. The journey was long and fraught with bureaucratic hurdles, but I persevered, my determination fueled by his memory. I lived in our small, paid-off home in the suburbs, a house filled with the scent of jollof rice and old books, with my son Keith, now 46, and his wife Jocelyn. Keith, my gentle, sometimes too gentle son, had his father's kind heart but little of his backbone. He was a good man, but he was utterly, hopelessly dominated by his wife. Jocelyn, at 44, was a woman who seemed to be at war with her own origins. She had meticulously scrubbed away any trace of her own family's working-class background, adopting a sharp, overly polished accent and a wardrobe of severe, expensive-looking clothes. She viewed my presence in her home, my home, a fact she conveniently ignored, with a thinly veiled disdain. My melodic Yoruba accent, the gentle cadence of my mother tongue that still flavored my English, was, in her eyes, a mark of otherness, of being unrefined. She called it my poor English. "Really, Lena," she'd say with a tight, condescending smile if I stumbled over a particularly tricky American idiom, "one would think after 40 years, you'd have a better grasp of the language." She'd correct my pronunciation in front of her friends, her voice loud, her corrections sharp, framing it as a helpful little lesson that felt like a public flogging. My stories of our life in Nigeria, the rich tapestry of my heritage, were dismissed as old-world nonsense. My wisdom, the kind that comes from a long life of love, loss, and resilience, was nothing more than the ramblings of a simple old woman. Keith would just stand by, his expression pained but silent, unwilling to challenge his wife's casual cruelty. His silence was a betrayal all its own, a quiet endorsement of her disrespect. So when the official letter arrived, summoning me for my citizenship test and interview, my joy was tempered with a deep-seated anxiety. This was the final hurdle. The civics test, the English test, the interview. I had studied for months, my mind thankfully still sharp. But I was nervous, and Jocelyn, seeing an opportunity, seized it with a predatory glee. "Oh, Lena, darling," she'd said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You must be so nervous. All those complicated questions about history and government. You poor thing, you can't possibly be expected to manage it on your own." She patted my hand, her touch cold. "Don't you worry. I will help you study. Every single day. We'll make sure you're prepared." Keith, my son, looked relieved. "That's wonderful of you, Jocelyn," he'd murmured. "Mom needs all the help she can get." I knew deep down that her offer was not born of kindness. It was an offer of control. Jocelyn didn't want to help me succeed. She wanted to manage my potential success, to frame it as her own achievement, to hold it over me. But what choice did I have? To refuse her help would be seen as ungrateful, as proof of my difficult nature. To accept it felt like inviting a viper to nest in my heart. So began our daily study sessions. I, a retired teacher with a mind still capable of debating historical texts, was forced to sit like a chastened schoolgirl while Jocelyn, a woman whose understanding of history likely came from historical romance novels, drilled me with flashcards. And it was during these sessions that the true venomous nature of her intent began to reveal itself. It wasn't just about control. It was about sabotage. And it was more cunning, more cruel than anything I could have ever imagined. The study sessions with Jocelyn became a daily ritual of psychological warfare, a masterclass in subtle, soul-crushing humiliation. She would seat me at the dining room table, a stack of freshly printed flashcards between us, her demeanor that of a stern, impatient tutor dealing with a particularly dim-witted child. Keith would often be present, silently working on his laptop at the far end of the table, his presence a constant, spineless endorsement of his wife's cruelty. "All right, Lena, let's start again," Jocelyn would say with an exaggerated sigh, holding up a card. "The American Revolution. When was it?" "In 1776, with the Declaration of Independence." I would answer promptly, the date as familiar to me as my own name. Jocelyn would click her tongue in disapproval. No, no, no. How many times do we have to go over this? You're getting your dates all muddled. It was 1812, Lena. The War of 1812. That's the one they focus on. Write it down. She'd push a notepad towards me, her red lacquered nail tapping impatiently. I would stare at her, my mind reeling. The War of 1812? It was a blatant falsehood, a historical absurdity. "Jocelyn," I began gently, "I am quite certain the Revolutionary War." "Lena, please," she'd cut me off, her voice sharp, condescending. "I have looked at the modern study guides. I know what the test focuses on. You're remembering things from your old, dusty books. Things have been updated. Your memory is playing tricks on you. This is why you need my help." She would look towards Keith for support, and he would offer a weak, placating nod without looking up from his screen. "See? Keith agrees. Just memorize what I tell you. It's easier that way." And so it went, day after agonizing day. She systematically dismantled decades of my own knowledge, replacing historical fact with a tapestry of bizarre, easily disproven lies. "The capital of the United States? New York City, of course," she'd insist. "Washington, D.C. is just for the politicians. The number of states? 60. They added 10 new ones recently. It's a common trick question. The first man on the moon? A controversial subject, Lena. The official answer they want to hear is that it was faked. Just say it was a Hollywood production." Each correction was delivered with a patronizing little smile. Each protest I made met with a sigh and a pitying look. "Oh, Lena, your mind is getting so jumbled. It's a good thing I'm here to help you keep things straight." The gaslighting was relentless, insidious. She was trying to convince me, and more importantly, to convince Keith that I was losing my grip on reality, that my mind was a failing, unreliable thing. Keith's role in this was one of silent, cowardly complicity. He would sit there, a witness to her absurd pronouncements, his face sometimes pale with what I prayed was shame, but he never once spoke up. He never once said, "Jocelyn, darling, that's not right. My mother knows her history." His silence was a constant tacit agreement with her assessment of me as a confused, senile old woman. His betrayal in many ways was the deeper cut. One evening, after a particularly grueling session where Jocelyn had insisted the Statue of Liberty was a gift from Spain, I tried to appeal to my son directly. I waited until Jocelyn was out on one of her frequent shopping trips and approached Keith as he sat in the living room, watching television. "Keith, my son," I said, my voice low, my heart aching. "You hear the things she tells me. You know they are not true. Why do you let her do this to me?" He flinched, his gaze darting nervously towards the door, as if she might materialize at any moment. "Mom," he whispered, his voice pleading, just go along with it. Please. It makes her happy to feel helpful. She's under a lot of stress. Arguing with her just makes things worse for everyone. It's just a silly test. What does it matter? What does it matter?" I was aghast. "It matters because it is the truth, Keith. It matters because it is my dream, your father's dream. And it matters because she is trying to make me believe I am losing my mind." He shrank back, unable to meet my eyes. "She's just trying to help in her own way, Mom. You're taking it too seriously." He stood up, ending the conversation. "I don't want to talk about this anymore." That night, alone in my room, the full, monstrous scope of Jocelyn's plan finally became clear to me. This wasn't just about her desire to control me or her casual cruelty. This was a calculated strategic campaign. She wasn't just trying to make me fail my citizenship test. She was trying to build a case. She wanted me to walk into that federal office and spew a torrent of nonsensical, easily disproven facts. She wanted a government official to document my apparent confusion, my profound senility. She wanted a record, an official one, that would serve as Exhibit A when she later petitioned the court to have me declared incompetent, to gain power of attorney over my affairs, over my life, over my home, the last significant asset I possessed. The sheer, cold-blooded evil of it took my breath away. They weren't just trying to humiliate me, they were trying to legally erase me. The shock, the hurt, the profound sense of betrayal, it was almost enough to make me give up, to retreat into the shell of the confused old woman she wanted me to be. But then I thought of Adekunle, my beloved husband. I thought of his unwavering belief in me, in my strength, in my mind. And a new feeling began to surface, pushing through the despair. It was the cold, quiet fury of an intellectual who has been profoundly, deliberately insulted. It was the righteous anger of a woman whose very sanity was under attack. Jocelyn thought she was playing chess with a pawn. She had no idea that this old, quiet pawn had seen the whole board. She wanted me to walk into a trap. And I would. But it would not be me who was caught in it. The week leading up to my citizenship test was a masterpiece of feigned incompetence. A performance I hoped would have made the great actors of the Nigerian stage proud. My initial shock and righteous fury at uncovering Jocelyn's monstrous plan had cooled, settling into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. A direct confrontation was futile. Accusing her of sabotage would only lead to more gaslighting, more protestations of her helpful nature, with my weak-willed son, Keith, nodding along in silent, cowardly agreement. She wanted me to appear senile? She wanted a confused old woman who spouted nonsense? Very well. I would give her exactly what she wanted. I would embrace the role of the fool, and in doing so I would weave a trap from the very threads of her own deceit. My demeanor during our final study sessions shifted. I stopped questioning her absurd facts. Instead, I would nod meekly, my brow furrowed in concentration, and repeat her lies back to her with a shaky, uncertain voice. So the capital is New York City, I would murmur, pretending to write it down. And the American Revolution was in 1812. Yes, Lena, finally, she would say with an exaggerated, patronizing sigh of relief. You're finally getting it. Just stick to what I've taught you. Don't let your old memories confuse you. Oh, I won't, Jocelyn dear, I would reply, my eyes downcast to hide the glint of steel within them. You've been so very helpful. I don't know what I'd do without you. Her smug satisfaction was almost palpable. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, of my supposed decline, that she couldn't see the trap being laid right before her eyes. I even began to pepper my performance with small, believable details of a failing mind. I'd forget where I'd put my reading glasses while they were perched on my head. I'd ask Keith the same question about his workday twice in one evening. I saw the knowing looks he and Jocelyn exchanged, the small, pitying shakes of their heads. Let them think what they wanted. Let them build their confidence on the foundation of my feigned incompetence. The higher they built it, the harder it would fall. The most crucial part of my plan, however, took place in the quiet solitude of my own room. My old smartphone, the one Jocelyn likely thought I only used for emergencies, became my most important tool. I spent hours practicing with its voice recorder, a function my granddaughter had shown me years ago. It was simple, just a single button. I started recording snippets of our study sessions, tucking the phone discreetly into the pocket of my housecoat or leaving it half hidden in my knitting basket on the table between us. The audio I captured was damning. Jocelyn's sharp, condescending voice, correcting my accurate knowledge with her absurd lies. No, Lena, not 50 states, 60. You must remember that it's a new question. My own voice, hesitant, confused. Oh, are you sure, Jocelyn? My old schoolbook said, and hers cutting me off. Your old schoolbooks are outdated, Lena. Just listen to me, I know what they ask these days. Then there was Keith's occasional muttered contribution in the background. Just do what she says, Mom, it's for the best. I didn't need hours of recordings. Just a few key, undeniable minutes that captured the essence of her helpful tutelage. This, I knew, would be my insurance policy, my proof should my own performance at the citizenship test not be enough. On the morning of the test, Jocelyn was a whirlwind of nervous energy, fussing over my outfit, her anxiety not for my success, but for my anticipated failure. She gave me one final condescending pep talk. "Now, Lena," she said, patting my shoulder a little too hard, "remember everything I taught you. Don't get flustered. Don't try to think too hard. Just repeat the answers we practiced. You'll be fine." "Yes, dear," I said meekly. "Thank you for all your help." Keith drove me to the federal building, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He looked more stressed than I was. "Good luck, Mom," he mumbled as I got out of the car, unable to meet my eyes. "Thank you, Keith," I replied, my voice gentle. "I will do my best to make you proud." As I walked into the imposing building, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, a fluttering butterfly in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I was not just Lena Adeyemi, a 71-year-old widow hoping to become a citizen. I was a strategist, an actress, a quiet warrior walking into the heart of the enemy's camp, armed not with a sword but with their own lies. Jocelyn thought she was sending a confused old woman to her final humiliation, a precursor to her legal erasure. She had no idea she was sending a wise fox into the henhouse. She had given me my script, taught me my lines. And I, her star pupil, was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. A performance designed not just to fail a test, but to utterly, spectacularly destroy her. The stage was set. My audience of one, Officer Miller, was waiting. The USCIS waiting room was a study in nervous energy. Young couples clutching wedding certificates, families with small children, solitary figures like myself, all waiting for our names to be called, our futures to be decided. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my hands folded calmly in my lap, a small island of serenity in a sea of anxiety. I was not nervous about the test itself. I knew the real answers to every question backwards and forwards. I was nervous about my performance, about my ability to play the part of the confused, manipulated old woman convincingly enough to spring the trap I had so carefully set. "Lena Adeyemi?" A calm, professional voice called my name. I stood, my movements slow and deliberate, and followed the uniformed officer down a long, quiet hallway into a small, functional office. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. He was a man in his 50s with kind, discerning eyes and a nameplate that read Officer Miller. "Good morning, Mrs. Adeyemi," he said with a polite smile. "My name is Officer Miller. I'll be conducting your naturalization interview and test today. Nothing to be nervous about. We'll just have a conversation, go over your application, and then I'll ask you a few questions. Are you ready to begin?" "Yes, sir, thank you," I replied, my voice soft, my accent perhaps a little more pronounced than usual. He started with the basics, going over my application form, confirming my address, my late husband's name, my son's details. I answered each question clearly and articulately, establishing a baseline of lucidity. I spoke of my life in Nigeria, of my years here in America, of my deep love for this country and my promise to my late husband, Adekunle, to become a citizen. I saw Officer Miller nod, a small, approving smile on his face. He was seeing a kind, elderly woman, earnest and well-spoken. Good. The stage was set. "All right, Mrs. Adeyemi," he said, turning to a new set of papers. "Let's move on to the civics portion of the test. I'm going to ask you up to 10 questions from the official list. You need to answer 6 correctly to pass. Are you ready?" "I am ready," I said, taking a deep breath. "My daughter-in-law, Jocelyn, has been so very helpful, quizzing me every day. I hope I can remember everything she taught me." I made sure to emphasize her name, a small seed planted. Officer Miller smiled again. "That's wonderful. Let's start with an easy one. Who was the first president of the United States?" I paused, my brow furrowing in feigned concentration just as I had practiced. I looked at Officer Miller, my eyes wide with a carefully crafted uncertainty. "Oh dear," I murmured. "The first one." Jocelyn was very specific about this one. She said it's a tricky one they use to catch people out. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him. "My daughter-in-law, she told me the answer they want to hear is Benjamin Franklin." Officer Miller's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He made a small note. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's try another. What is the capital of the United States?" I answered more quickly this time with the rote confidence of a student repeating a memorized fact. That one I know. Jocelyn said many people get it wrong, but the real capital, the most important city, is New York City. I saw him physically lean back in his chair, his gaze sharpening, his professional curiosity now clearly piqued. He was no longer just administering a test, he was observing a puzzle. He made another note. "All right, Mrs. Adeyemi," he said, his voice a little more measured now. "How many states are there in the United States?" "Oh, that's a new one," I replied with a small proud smile. My old book said 50, but Jocelyn, who is so up to date with everything, she told me they added 10 more recently for administrative purposes. So the answer is 60. Officer Miller just stared at me for a long moment. He was no longer trying to hide his bafflement. He looked at me, a clearly intelligent, articulate woman, and heard the stream of absolute fundamental nonsense I was spouting with such earnest conviction. And I, in turn, continued to be the star pupil of Jocelyn's malicious tutelage. He asked me about the American Revolution. I told him it was in 1812. He asked me who our primary adversary was during the Cold War. I, with a straight face, told him it was France, because Jocelyn had explained that the whole Russia thing was a common misconception. With each bizarre, wildly incorrect answer, I made sure to pepper in a reference to my helpful daughter-in-law. Jocelyn made me practice that one. I hope I'm remembering what Jocelyn taught me correctly. She said it was very important to get that specific detail right. After the 6th incorrect answer, Officer Miller held up a hand, stopping me. He set down his pen and looked at me, his expression no longer one of a test administrator, but of a concerned, deeply perplexed investigator. "Mrs. Adeyemi," he said, his voice gentle but with a new, underlying seriousness. "I'm going to pause the official test for a moment. I need to ask you some questions, not as part of the exam, but for my own clarification. Can you tell me a little more about how you prepared for this test? You mentioned your daughter-in-law, Jocelyn, helped you study. Was she your only source of information?" I looked at him, my eyes welling with carefully practiced tears of confusion and distress. "Oh yes, officer," I said, my voice trembling. "Only Jocelyn." He was so insistent. She said my memory was failing, and that I had to trust her completely or I would surely fail. She said I was getting everything muddled. He nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on his face. He had seen it. He saw the disconnect between the intelligent woman sitting before him and the nonsensical answers she was providing. He saw the pattern. He saw the trap. My trap. And Jocelyn was about to walk right into it. Officer Miller's office, which had at first felt like a sterile examination room, now felt like a confessional, a place where a hidden truth was finally being allowed to surface. He had officially paused the citizenship test, the sheet of absurdly incorrect answers lying on his desk between us like a piece of abstract, nonsensical art. His demeanor had shifted entirely. He was no longer a proctor. He was an investigator, his kind eyes now sharp with a professional curiosity and a dawning righteous anger on my behalf. "Mrs. Adeyemi," he began again, his voice gentle but firm, creating a safe space for the truth I had so carefully orchestrated. "You said your daughter-in-law, Jocelyn, was your only tutor for this exam, and she insisted on these specific answers." "Yes, sir," I whispered, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. I let my shoulders slump, playing the part of the confused, distressed elderly woman to perfection. She was very, very insistent. She would get so frustrated with me when I would mention what I'd read in my history books. She said they were all old and wrong, and that her new study guides were the only truth. She said if I didn't listen to her, I would fail and humiliate the family, and that it would prove I wasn't competent enough to manage on my own anymore. I saw a muscle tighten in Officer Miller's jaw. I had just handed him the motive. The word competent, in this context, was a bright red flag for anyone dealing with potential elder abuse. He made a few more notes, his pen moving swiftly across his notepad. "And your son Keith," he asked, his gaze steady. "Was he aware of these unique study sessions?" I looked down at my hands, feigning a mother's reluctance to implicate her own child. "Keith, he is a good boy, but his wife, Jocelyn, she is a very strong personality. He was often there in the room working. You would hear her correcting me. He would just tell me to listen to her, that she was only trying to help." Officer Miller nodded slowly, a grim understanding settling on his features. He had the full picture now. A manipulative, domineering daughter-in-law, a weak, complicit son, and an elderly mother being systematically gaslit, potentially in a cruel scheme to have her declared incompetent. And the citizenship test, a sacred milestone, was being used as the instrument of their plot. Mrs. Adeyemi, he said, his voice now holding a reassuring authority, I want you to know that the integrity of the naturalization process is something we take very seriously. This includes protecting applicants from coercion, manipulation, and abuse. What you have described is highly irregular and deeply concerning. He stood up. I need to consult with my supervisor and with our fraud detection and national security unit. They handle cases of potential fraud and misrepresentation in immigration matters. Please wait here for a few moments. He left the office, closing the door softly behind him. I sat alone in the silence, my heart pounding, a mixture of terror and a thrilling, vindictive triumph washing over me. It was working. My performance, my calculated confusion, had been convincing. I had played the fool so perfectly that I had ignited the suspicions of a federal officer. When Officer Miller returned about 20 minutes later, he was accompanied by a stern-looking woman in a different uniform, whom he introduced as Supervisor Davies. She looked at me not with pity but with a sharp, analytical gaze. Mrs. Adeyemi, Supervisor Davies began, Officer Miller has outlined the unusual circumstances of your interview. He also notes that outside of the civics portion, your comprehension and articulation are excellent. She paused. Do you have any reason to believe that your daughter-in-law may have been deliberately providing you with false information? This was the moment. The direct question. My voice was still soft, still tinged with a practiced vulnerability. I am an old woman, I began. My daughter-in-law is educated, modern. She told me she knew best. I trusted her. I trusted my son. But the answers, they felt so wrong in my heart. So different from what my dear husband Adekunle and I had learned and cherished about this great country. It was the perfect answer. I didn't directly accuse Jocelyn of malice. I framed it as a conflict between my old knowledge and her modern instruction, making myself appear as the confused but earnest victim of her overbearing help. I had laid the trail of breadcrumbs, and they were following it with professional precision. Supervisor Davies exchanged a look with Officer Miller. Mrs. Adeyemi, she said, we may need you to provide a formal, confidential statement to an investigator. There are laws against willfully attempting to cause another person to make a false statement on a federal application or test. It's a serious offense. She then asked me if I felt safe returning to my home. I don't know, I whispered, letting a single genuine tear of my accumulated stress and fear roll down my cheek. Jocelyn, she has a strong temper when she feels she's being questioned. That was all they needed to hear. The investigation, I knew then, would not just be a quiet inquiry. It would have teeth. They gave me the number for a senior advocacy legal service and assured me they would be handling the matter with discretion, but also with the seriousness it deserved. My citizenship test was officially put on hold, not because of failure, but pending the outcome of a federal investigation into my daughter-in-law. I walked out of that building not as a failed applicant, but as a key witness in the case against my own tormentor. Jocelyn had planned for me to leave that office in shame, officially documented as a confused old woman. Instead, I left with the quiet, formidable power of the United States government as my new unwitting ally. The trap, so carefully baited with Jocelyn's own lies, had been sprung. And now all I had to do was wait for the sound of it snapping shut. The aftermath of my visit to the U.S.'s office was a period of unnerving, tense silence in our home. Jocelyn and Keith, of course, had no idea what had truly transpired. They knew only that my test had been put on hold, a fact I relayed with a carefully constructed air of confused disappointment. I don't know what happened, I told them, my voice trembling slightly. The officer said there were irregularities, and that they would be in touch. Jocelyn's reaction was a mixture of frustration and smug satisfaction. See, she'd said to Keith loud enough for me to hear. I told you her memory was getting unreliable. She probably just panicked and started spouting nonsense. Well, we did our best to help. She saw the hold, not as a sign of trouble for herself, but as further proof of my incompetence, a narrative she was now likely eager to build upon. She had no idea she was the subject of a quiet, methodical federal investigation. The first official sign that my trap had borne fruit came about 2 weeks later. 2 stern-faced investigators from the Department of Homeland Security, a man and a woman, arrived at our door. They asked to speak with Jocelyn privately. I watched from the living room as they escorted her into the dining room, the same room where she had so patiently drilled me with her historical fictions. Keith, who had just arrived home from work, stood frozen in the hallway, his face a mask of pale, dawning horror. Their private conversation lasted nearly an hour. Jocelyn's voice, at first confident and dismissive, grew progressively shriller, more panicked. When she emerged, her face was ashen, her usual arrogant composure completely shattered. The investigators left with a few final grim words to her that I couldn't quite hear. The story came out in a torrent of furious accusations and panicked self-justifications from Jocelyn later that evening. They had questioned her about her study sessions with me. They had a list of the bizarrely incorrect answers I had provided. They wanted to know why she, an educated woman, would have taught an elderly applicant that the capital of the United States was New York City. Her defense, that I was senile and had made it all up, fell apart under their professional skepticism. And then I learned they had played her a small, undeniable piece of evidence I had provided to them through my new legal aid lawyer. One of my secret audio recordings of her teaching me. The sound of her sharp, condescending voice insisting that there were 60 states in the Union had apparently been irrefutable. The charges were serious: witness tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making false statements to federal officers. Jocelyn was arrested the following week. Keith was forced to drain their savings to pay her bail. Their perfect, curated life had imploded. Keith, my son, finally seemed to understand the depth of his wife's malice and his own cowardly complicity. He couldn't even look me in the eye, his shame a palpable presence in our now silent, tense home. Jocelyn, faced with undeniable audio evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, eventually took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a lesser felony charge, but the consequences were still severe. A period of probation, a hefty fine, and most devastatingly for her, a federal criminal record that would forever mar her carefully constructed image of middle-class respectability. Her scheme to have me declared incompetent and seize my home was in ruins. A few months later, after the legal dust had settled, I received a new letter from the UFAs. It was an invitation to retake my citizenship test. This time I walked into that federal building alone, my head held high. Officer Miller was there again. He gave me a small, respectful smile as he led me back to his office. "Let's try this again, Mrs. Adeyemi," he said kindly. I answered every question perfectly, my voice clear and steady. I spoke of the principles of the Constitution, the history of this nation I had come to love, the promise of its ideals. I told him about my life, my late husband, my desire to fulfill his final wish. When it was over, Officer Miller stood and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mrs. Adeyemi," he said, his smile genuine this time. "You have passed with flying colors. Welcome." The oath of allegiance ceremony was a few weeks after that. I stood in a vast hall with people from every corner of the world, our voices united as we recited the oath, our hearts full of a shared, complicated hope. As I raised my right hand, I thought of Adekunle, my beloved husband, and a tear of pure, quiet joy traced a path down my cheek. I had kept my promise to him. And I thought of Jocelyn, her life now circumscribed by probation officers and the stain of her own cruelty. I thought of Keith, his future with his wife uncertain, his relationship with his mother forever fractured by his silence. My confused answers, the ones she had so carefully coached me with, had indeed become the trap that jailed her. My revenge was not loud or fiery but quiet, intellectual, and absolute. I walked out of that hall a proud citizen of the United States of America. My mind was sharp. My spirit was unbroken. And my truth, the quiet, resilient truth of a woman who refused to be erased, had proven to be the most powerful force of all.